I want to speak to you tonight about something that is almost universally misunderstood and whose misunderstanding causes some of the most persistent suffering I have witnessed in human lives: emotional detachment. When most people hear those words, they imagine a kind of coldness, a withdrawal from the richness of human feeling, deliberate numbing of the responses that make life vivid and connection possible. They imagine someone who has closed themselves off, who has decided, after too much pain, that caring is dangerous, and has built around themselves a careful distance from everything that might hurt them. That is not what I am going to teach you tonight. That kind of detachment is not freedom. It is simply a different form of bondage, the bondage of one who is so afraid of attachment that they have made the avoidance of feeling their new prison. What I am going to describe tonight is something entirely different. It is the freedom that comes not from caring less, but from drawing your sense of completeness from a different source, not from the approval or affection or presence of another person, but from the awareness within you that is already whole, already sufficient, already the source of everything you have been seeking outside yourself. This freedom is not cold. In fact, it is the only condition under which genuinely warm, genuinely free love becomes possible. Because love that comes from lack is not love at all, but need wearing love's name. And need, however sincerely felt, will always eventually contract into grasping, and grasping into suffering. Tonight, I want to give you 5 principles, not techniques in the mechanical sense. 5 ways of understanding and orienting yourself that, practiced consistently, will move you from the prison of emotional dependency to the open ground of genuine freedom. Not the freedom of not caring, but the freedom of not needing. Let's begin at the foundation, because without the foundation, everything else is scaffolding with nothing to hold it. The foundation is this: you are not what you have been assuming you are. You have been assuming, most of the time without examining the assumption, that you are the sum of your relationships. Your worth is established by whether the right people see it, that your completeness depends on the presence and approval of certain others. To be fully yourself, you require certain external confirmations that you are loved, valued, chosen. Enough. This assumption so deeply embedded that most people cannot immediately recognize it as an assumption rather than a fact, is the root of all emotional dependency, is the thing that makes the withdrawal of another person's affection feel like the withdrawal of your own worth. It is the thing that makes approval seeking compulsive rather than occasional. It is the thing that makes a relationship feel, from the inside, less like a choice and more like a necessity. And it is wrong. Not wrong as a moral judgment, wrong as a description of what you actually are. You are the awareness within which all of this experience occurs. You are I am the consciousness, the presence, the living ground of experience that was there before the relationship, that is there during it, that will be there after it, in whatever form that takes. This awareness is not diminished by the absence of another person's regard. It is not enlarged by their presence. It simply is complete, sufficient, entire unto itself. The way a flame is entire unto itself, regardless of whether anyone is in the room to see it burn. When Scripture records the divine name as I am that I am, it is pointing directly at this, not at a being separate from you who bears that name, at the nature of consciousness itself, your consciousness, which is the only thing that is incontrovertibly, undeniably, always and already present. The I am is what you are before you add anything to it, before you add successful or loved or worthy or enough. I am pure, sufficient, complete. The first principle of emotional detachment is simply the practice of returning to this recognition, not once, in a moment of inspiration, but repeatedly in the ordinary moments of your day. When the urge for another's validation arises, notice it. Do not fight it. Simply notice and return to the I am, not as an affirmation designed to override the feeling, but as a genuine recognition of what is actually true about you beneath the feeling. I'm already whole. The wholeness does not require confirmation from outside. This recognition is the root from which all genuine detachment grows, because you cannot detach from a source of your completeness. You can only detach from something when you have found in yourself the completeness that you were seeking there. The completeness is already present. The I am is already there. You are not building it. You are recognizing what was never absent. Second principle I want to give you is the one I return to in every context in which transformation is the subject, because it is the one that most precisely describes how consciousness actually creates. Live in the end, in the context of emotional detachment. The end I am asking you to inhabit is this: the state of one who is already emotionally free, already whole unto themselves, already at peace with their own company, their own worth, their own completeness, independent of any particular person's presence or approval or behavior. This is not a state you are trying to achieve. It is a state you are inhabiting in consciousness now, before the outer world has confirmed it, because you understand that the outer world always follows the inner, that the only way to produce the outer condition of emotional freedom is to first establish its inner equivalent. Close your eyes and find this person, the emotionally free version of you. How do they move through a day? Not with the tight monitoring anxiety of one who is tracking another person's responses for clues about their own worth. The easy, grounded movement of one who is not tracking anything in that way, because they are not dependent on those clues. There's a specific quality of spaciousness in their inner life, a room that is not full of another person's imagined opinions, because that room has been reclaimed for their own inhabitation. How do they enter a room? With the specific ease of someone whose confidence does not fluctuate based on who is or is not looking. How do they speak without the particular shaping of words toward anticipated approval? How do they receive criticism without the specific collapse that happens when your sense of yourself is contingent on another person's judgment of you? These are not abstract qualities. They are specific, feelable, imaginable. And imagining them, inhabiting them in the body, in the breath, in the specific physical correlates of that state, is living in the end, is the important precision. This is not pretending. This is not the performance of an equanimity you do not genuinely feel, designed to convince yourself or others that you are something you are not yet. This is the deliberate use of imagination to establish in consciousness a state from which the outer reality must grow. The law does not distinguish between the vividly imagined and the physically experienced. Subconscious receives both with equal faithfulness and produces both with equal reliability. Practice this every night before sleep and in the quiet minutes before full waking. A brief, specific experience of being the emotionally free version of yourself, not thinking about what that would look like, but actually inhabiting the feeling of it, even for 30 seconds, is planting. And what is planted consistently in the deep mind grows by law into the conditions of the outer life. The third principle is closely related to the second, but makes a distinction that is practically crucial, because without it, people practice living in the end and still remain the operative sense outside it. The distinction is this: There is a difference between thinking of the end and thinking from the end. Thinking of the end keeps you outside it, observing it at a distance as a desired future state. Thinking from the end places you inside it as a present reality, as the ground from which thought naturally arises. When you think of emotional freedom, you are still emotionally dependent, looking at freedom from the vantage point of someone who does not yet have it. When you think from emotional freedom, the dependency is not what you are looking from. You are inside the free state, and thought arises from there. Practical difference is enormous. Let me describe what it feels like. Thinking of the end sounds like, I want to feel free of this attachment. I'm trying to detach. I will one day be the person who is not affected by this person's behavior. The wanting and the trying and the will be are all located in the future. Speaker is still in the old state, reaching. Thinking from the end sounds internally like nothing dramatic at all. There is no reaching, because there is nowhere to reach. The thought is simply arising from inside the already free state. A person does not narrate their freedom because they are inhabiting it the way you inhabit any ordinary state, without commentary, without effort, without the self-consciousness of someone who knows they are performing. This is what I mean when I say assume the state rather than aim at it. Assumption does not strain, it simply is. It is the specific quality of a belief that has moved below the level of deliberate thought and settled into the background of consciousness, operating automatically, shaping perception and response without requiring ongoing effort to maintain. The practice is, whenever you notice yourself thinking of the free state, observing it at a distance, rating your aspiration toward it, step inside it, shift from the outside to inside, feel the difference in the body. The reaching relaxes. The monitoring quiets. There is a specific settling that happens when you move from aiming at a state to inhabiting one. Find that settling and rest in it, however briefly. And when you notice yourself slipping back to the old state, which will happen, because old assumptions have years of momentum, do not judge the slip. Simply notice it and step back inside, not with force, with the quiet naturalness of returning to a room you know well. Each return is the assumption deepening. Each return is the new state's roots, growing stronger in the deeper soil of consciousness. Fourth principle is the one that most directly addresses what people actually experience when they are working with emotional detachment, and it is the one most frequently misunderstood. The principle is the release of resistance. Here is what I mean, and what I do not mean. I do not mean the suppression of feeling. I do not mean the forced replacement of difficult emotions with positive ones. I do not mean the performance of equanimity over feelings that are still present and still painful. This kind of resistance by suppression does not produce detachment. It produces a sealed container of unprocessed feeling that continues to exert its pressure from below. What I mean by releasing resistance is something more precise and more fundamental. When you are attached to someone, there are two layers of experience. First is the actual feeling, the love, the longing, the hurt, the fear of loss. This is the feeling itself, the raw experience. The second layer is your relationship to the feeling specifically, your judgment of it. The layer that says, I should not feel this way. I need to stop feeling this. This feeling is making me weak. I am pathetic for still feeling this after all this time. Second layer is the resistance. And it is the resistance, not the feeling itself, that locks you in place. When you resist a feeling, you give it power. The energy you direct against it keeps it present and active in your consciousness, because you cannot move away from something you are pressing against. Feeling you are fighting continues to exist precisely because of the energy of your fighting it. You release the resistance when you stop judging the feeling and simply allow it to be what it is, acknowledged without amplification, present without urgency. Something interesting happens. Feeling does not necessarily disappear immediately, but it loses its pressure. It becomes less absolute. It can be observed rather than inhabited. That quality of observation, the capacity to watch a feeling arise rather than being consumed by it, is itself a form of the detachment you are seeking. This is the recognition the great contemplative teachers have pointed toward. You are not your feelings. You are the awareness in which feelings arise and pass. Feeling that is resisted must persist, because resistance holds it in place. A feeling that is acknowledged and allowed will move, because that is the nature of all experience, that is not artificially pinned by resistance. Practice this. When the feeling of attachment arises, the longing, hurt, the specific ache of wanting something from this person, do not fight it. Do not judge yourself for having it. Simply acknowledge it. It is here. Let it be present without making it permanent. Watch it with the curious, non-judgmental attention of one who is slightly larger than the experience. You are the awareness, and the feeling is arising within you. It is not you. It is weather moving through the space that you are. This acknowledgement is not defeat. It is the precise movement that allows the feeling to complete its natural arc and pass, rather than being held in place by the energy of your resistance to it. Fifth principle is the one that, when genuinely established, makes all the others natural rather than effortful. It is the ground in which everything else is rooted. The stillness, not the stillness of a mind that has managed to stop thinking, not the stillness of a person who has suppressed all their feelings into a temporary quiet. Stillness of the awareness that is prior to thought and feeling, the space in which both arise and into which both return, unchanged by their movement, diminished by their content. You have touched this stillness. Every person has, though most have not recognized it as such. It is the quality of a particular kind of moment, perhaps in nature, perhaps in music, perhaps in the sudden clarity of a morning, before the day's activity begins, when the inner chatter quiets, not because you stopped it, but because it simply was not there for a moment. And what remained was a presence that felt both very simple and very complete. Presence is your actual nature, not a mood, not a temporary state, not the product of favorable circumstances. Awareness itself, the I am that was there before the relationship and will be there after it in its own nature, unobscured by the constant movement of thought and emotion. Still, not static alive, present, attentive, but still, the way deep water is still at depth even when the surface is active. Cultivating this stillness does not require hours of formal practice. For intentional quiet time, each day is valuable. It requires something simpler and more continuous, the repeated, brief return to the sense of being the witness rather than the witnessed. Throughout your day, in the pause between one activity and the next, in the breath before a difficult moment, in the second, before you respond to something that might otherwise trigger the old reactive pattern. Take one moment to step back slightly from the content of your experience and rest in the awareness of it. Not analyzing the experience, not judging it, not trying to change it. Simply being the awareness that is observing it. This stepping back is not dissociation. It is the recognition of your actual position in relation to your experience, which is not inside it, identified with it, overwhelmed by it, but spacious around it, ground in which it arises. From that ground, emotional reactions lose their absolute quality. They become events in awareness rather than the totality of your experience. An event that arises in awareness cannot imprison you because you are not the event. You are what the event is arising in. This is the culmination of emotional detachment, not the suppression of feeling, not the withdrawal of care, not the coldness that keeps life at a distance, the spacious, alive, fully present awareness that can engage completely with another person, love them genuinely, can be moved by them, can care deeply, all without losing the ground of its own completeness. Because the ground is what you are. It is not at risk from the movement of experience within it. Let me close tonight with the thing that I want you to carry most firmly. It is the thing most easily lost in a teaching about detachment. This is not a teaching about caring less. It is a teaching about the condition under which you can care most freely and most fully. When you love from need, when your sense of yourself is dependent on the responses of another person, you are not actually fully present with them. You are present with your monitoring of them, with your constant, largely unconscious assessment of how they are responding to you, what it means about your worth, whether they are moving toward or away from you, whether the signals are good or bad. The other person is not entirely seen because they are being seen through the filter of your need. They are being experienced primarily as a source of validation, of security, of the feeling that you are enough. When you love from the ground of your own completeness, from the I am, that does not require their response to know its own wholeness, you can, perhaps for the first time, actually see them, not as a source of what you need, but as the particular, specific, unrepeatable person they actually are. You can love them for what they are rather than for what they provide. You can give freely rather than trade anxiously. You can be with them without the constant background transaction of need. This is the love the great teachers have called unconditional. Not love that has no preferences, not love that accepts any treatment, love that is not contingent on the other person, providing you with the sense of your own worth, love that comes from overflow rather than from deficit. This love, which is only available from the ground of your own completeness, is more sustaining, more genuine, more recognizable to the other person as actual love than any amount of need-driven clinging could ever be. So practice these 5 principles, not as a project of emotional surgery, not as the withdrawal of care from someone you love, as the cultivation of the very ground from which genuine love becomes possible. Recognize the I am within the awareness that is already complete and does not require confirmation. Live in the end, inhabit the state of emotional freedom in imagination before it is confirmed in the outer world. Assume the state, step inside it, rather than aiming at it from outside. Release resistance. Allow what is present to be present, without judging it into permanence. Cultivate inner stillness, find and return to the awareness that is prior to all the movement. Spacious, stable, alive. And in doing all of this, discover what I am describing when I say that true detachment is not the end of love, but its beginning. The person who has found their own completeness does not love less. They love without the contract that says, your presence is required for me to be whole. Love without that contract. Love that is given freely, from fullness, without the anxious arithmetic of need, is the only love that actually feels like love to the one receiving it. Go now and claim the freedom that was always yours. Not the freedom from caring, the freedom to care from the ground of a self that needs nothing to be what it already is. Neville Lectures. I'll see you again in the next video.